Excellent. It is just now 11:30, so welcome to Salesforce's new grants management solution, Outbound Funds Module. We are just getting started here, and so I am going to share a screen and thank our sponsors real quick here. Let's see. There we go. Those are the great people who sponsored this amazing event, Nonprofit Dreaming. I am Sherry Carlson. I am a senior consultant at North Peak Solutions, where I work with nonprofits and foundations in Salesforce. And I've been a member of the Outbound Funds community team since its inception at the Community Sprint in 2017. A little bit about Outbound Funds. It's a free Salesforce.org product that customizes Salesforce to manage grants and distribution of other kinds of funds. And like any other product, like NPSP or PMM, it's customizable and extendable, so you can configure it to suit your needs and the way your team works. And you can integrate it with systems and products that you prefer for email and accounting and websites. I feel like this is something that everyone already knows, but I thought I would get those things out of the way. Today, we're going to do a really short demo of Outbound Funds, and then we're going to talk with Mara and Nell about how their organizations use Outbound Funds and why it was the right solution. And then we're going to leave some time at the end for some audience Q&A. Those go in the chat, and we have somebody who's going to help us kind of moderate that. With that, Maura and Nell, can you tell us a little bit about yourselves? Maura, if you want to start us out.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Maura Hackett. I'm the Director of Operations at Neo Philanthropy in New York City, which is a social justice grant-making and fiscal intermediary organization. And in my role, I am the Salesforce administrator as well as the project manager for relaunching Salesforce at Neo for our workflow management and grants management system. And we've been using Outbound Funds just about coming up on a year.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nell O'Connell. I am the grants manager at Community Catalyst. Community Catalyst is a national consumer advocacy nonprofit, and we provide technical assistance to consumer advocacy organizations. And pairing with that technical assistance, we provide grants. So we often serve that intermediary role. And with that grant making, we are using our Outbound Funds to manage that. And my role is managing all the money that goes out the door from Community Catalyst to our partners across the nation.
Excellent. Thanks, Maura and Nell. We're going to do a quick audience poll to see who's here today. So you should see a poll come up and just answer what your role is. If you're a Salesforce admin, you have the technical role and responsibilities. If you're program staff, you use the system, but you're not technically responsible for the system. Or we know there's other people in the room, whether you're Salesforce.org staff or other people just interested in Salesforce. If you want to put your role in the poll, that would be great. Mm-hmm. Excellent. And for those of you who didn't see, there is a polls tab, so I'm hoping you guys saw that. Let's see. Oh, we have some implementation partners and some consultants. I'm right there with you guys. There's lots of Salesforce admins. Oh, goodness. I see one of our Outbound Funds team members just flew by as a role. Excellent. Well, the poll is in your events tab, and there's a chat, and then there's also a poll option under there, in case you want to see that. But it looks like we have a lot of different people in here. It's always great to see who's in the room, I should say, not on the call, who's in the room, so that we can kind of tailor what we're saying to you guys. So I'm gonna keep going here. The next thing we're actually going to do is a quick demo of outbound funds. In light of technological issues, we are doing a recorded demo, but you'll get to hear my voice as we walk through the demo. And we'll share a link to the demo maybe a little later in the chat as well. All right, so I'm gonna push play and let the technology work for me. So as I said before, with outbound funds, organizations can manage requests for funding and they can track the life cycle of funding applications, as well as the people who are associated to the application. For example, we can see the grant manager, the financial manager, and the applicant in the funding request roles. Funding requests can also capture supporting documentation and reports, and you can track payment schedules and disbursements to awardees. But first, we're going to take a look at the funding programs. The funding program represents a thematic or strategic program that an organization is providing funding for, as well as specific funding dockets and calls for applications. On this screen, you can track the program manager for that funding program, the dates of the program, as well as the status of the program. Funding, you can also add custom fields such as the application due date field. That's something that we added for this foundation. You can also put your funding programs in a hierarchy. There is a currency field where you can store the total amount of funding for the program, and you can also view some high-level budget information on the analysis tab. Applications are stored in the funding request record, and on a funding request, you can see the funding program, of course, the application date, the status, the geographical area served and population served, the applying contact, like the ED or program director, the award information, the requested and awarded amounts, and then for awarded grants, you can also see how much has been awarded and how much is available for disbursement. Of course, as you all know, you can customize any of this to fit your needs. Organizations can accept applications outside of Salesforce and enter them manually, or they have options to sync online applications directly into Salesforce. One option is to use an online form tool like Form Assembly that integrates with Salesforce, and more robust tools can also provide a portal experience and reviewing and scoring functionality for applications. There's plenty of options out there, as you all know. You can search for them on the App Exchange, or a Google search would show options as well. A second option, of course, is always Salesforce Communities, or Experience, as we should all call it now, which is the type of online portal. In this case, we're just going to use a form tool, and they're going to submit their application via this form tool, and a funding request record is created. At this point in the grant application cycle, we all know we need to check the charitable status and OFAC status, which we aren't showing today, but there's apps that support that process as well. And then after verifying that, the foundation starts the review process. That looks different at every foundation, but in this case, we're just going to manually update the status to awarded. Before dispersing any funding, the foundation requires a grant contract to be signed. This is where requirements comes in. The foundation can set up requirements for each item that's been completed, like LOIs, applications, reports, reviews, and more. And they can attach documents to these requirement records. In this case, we're going to time travel a bit again, and the foundation has already received the grantee signed contract, and they're ready to disperse payments to them. They record these payments on the disbursement record. On the disbursement record, you can track things like the amount to be paid, the date for which the payment is scheduled, the actual disbursement date, the status of the payment, the type of payment, and the disbursement method. This should look really similar to the payments in NPSP if you're familiar with that. The foundation will disperse these awards across 3 payments. So rather than setting up 3 individual disbursement records, they use the Create Disbursements wizard on the funding request to create the right number of disbursements. The system will calculate the disbursements based on the selected intervals and the amount. This foundation also wants to track the general accounting unit the funds are being dispersed from. So we're actually going to set up a GAU expenditure record to track that. Again, this should look really similar to what you'd see in NPSP when you are managing allocations for GAUs. For foundations that need to connect their disbursement records to accounting systems, of course, a number of accounting systems integrate with Salesforce, and the Salesforce product accounting subledger provides templates for integrating with several systems. And finally, when foundations want to understand their full impact, they can use Salesforce reporting to understand their metrics within and across funding programs. For example, funding program analytics. You can also see the amount awarded by population served, or based on the programs, the number of applications and the amount awarded for each application or program. And then on the home page, we have a fancy dashboard showing the awarded grants by docket, the funding available, and then grants awarded this year and funding dispersed this year. So that is just a quick look at how foundations can use the Outbound Funds module. I'm actually going to stop sharing my screen in just a moment so that we can just have a conversation with Maura and Nell about their experience with Outbound Funds. All right. So Nell and Maura, I would love to hear how your organizations use Outbound Funds. Maura, if you want to get us started.
Sure. So at NEO, we have a mix of collaborative funds as well as projects that are through our donor services and fiscally sponsored programs. And so we use outbound funds for our grant making efforts through the collaborative funds, as well as a small number of project grant making, as well as consultant contracts, vendor payments, and tracking and organizing RFP and docket grant making processes.
And Nell?
Yes, so similar, we are using the Outbound Funds as our grants management database. So we have about anywhere from 9 to 15 different grant making programs at a time. And each of our programs, a certain amount of their budget then gets regranted in the field. So we handle all of the data collection and information regarding the reports, the requirements, and documents that relate to those grants in Salesforce.
Excellent. So I think something both of you guys have in common is that you're managing inbound and outbound funds. That's a common use case. And that was actually top of mind when we were building the solution, and noticed that orgs can use sales, but I should say, you can also use it just as a standalone grants management system. You don't have to worry about the inbound side. Let's talk a little bit more about why Outbound Funds was the right solution for your grant making and fund disbursement activities. The question is, can you tell us a bit more about how you decided to use Outbound Funds module? What were you using before? Why did you consider this new option? What made you decide that the Outbound Funds was right for you as opposed to other things? And what alternative systems did you consider? And Maura, I'm going to have you get us started again.
Sure. So Outbound Funds was part of our overall Salesforce rebuild and relaunch that we did in collaboration with North Peak. And we launched last February, so February 2020. And prior to this, each team kind of had their own setup, which usually consisted of multiple spreadsheets, and actually interfund transfers that were on paper that would be walked across the office for somebody else to sign. And what we ended up doing was trying to figure out a system that would break down some of those silos and the visibility while still being able to partition our grant making efforts across either the collaborative funds as well as our projects. And then there are a handful of organizations that receive grants from multiple departments, and being able to see and track that was really key to the management system that we implemented.
Excellent. And Nell, you want to hop in
Yes.
too?
Yeah, I would echo some of that. Transparency across the organization was one of our greatest hopes in this. So a few years ago, we were translating all of our knowledge management, and Salesforce was becoming our new CRM, and that was kind of the phase one. And the phase two was like, oh, we should do something about outgoing grants, because every program has a different spreadsheet and a different spreadsheet on top of all those spreadsheets. So it was just one person trying to, being me, run after all these spreadsheets and run after all these people, and all the information was in people's heads, we're a small organization that grew really fast. So a lot of that knowledge management was walking around with people. So we really wanted to create a system that not only could house this information, but we could use that to improve our grant making. So when the question came down to like, okay, well, what type of tool are we going to invest in? You know, there's a lot of grants management tools out there, and it can be exciting and overwhelming and all at the same time. So because we were working with a consultant on translating our CRM into Salesforce, they were like, hey, there's this new thing. I know a little bit about it. Let's kind of explore it. So it was the right option for us because we are a smaller grant making nonprofit. So the cost was right. And I think the idea that we as staff were implementing this, the experience was right. So I was able to come on and learn a lot with our Salesforce admin. It was really approachable, and we've been able to learn and grow with the tool. So we're really excited about it. We're excited about what can come from it.
Thank you. It seems like both of you guys saw an opportunity as you were rethinking your entire CRM and grants management solution. You were thinking about how to manage many processes and teams in a centralized system. And for Community Catalyst, it was really accessible because it was free and open source. And for Neo, I can add a little bit more to that because I actually helped Neo choose Outbound Funds as their solution. So I can give a little more insight into that. To be honest, they just really needed a streamlined place to see incoming and outgoing funds. And to be perfectly transparent, because I was on the team that helped develop Outbound Funds, I knew it would be a good solution for them because I was part of that development. And it just seemed to give them the foundation they needed to grow. To be honest, they were still in the process of growing and learning their system, but because of the simple and kind of straightforward foundation that Outbound Funds gives them, they can use it in the way that they need to and grow in that. So to kind of grow, as I'd like to say, into a coordinated data sharing organization, which is the dream, I think. So, so I'm going to move on to the next question. We all know that moving into new system and using new tools comes with high and low points. Can you share the highlights and maybe some of the low points of the implementation process? And Maura, I'm going to start with you again because it's easy.
Sure. So timing wise, the rebuild of our entire Salesforce CRM and grants management systems at Neo also came around at the same time that we were looking at codifying a lot of our processes through an equity lens. And so one of the things that we found was that disproportionately our junior staff were, experiencing a lot of the redundancies and the burdens of paperwork. And so this was part of that effort to kind of streamline things, make it a little bit more equitable, get everybody involved, and make sure that there was visibility across the teams, especially as it related to finance and legal. And so in theory, that's where we were going. And there's been buy-in kind of and revolutions, as we've been going, where suddenly there's light bulb moments of, this does work, and I can see that now, which has been slow in coming, but it's happening, and it's always encouraging. One of the challenges is, in order to get to that point, there needs to be adjustments to workflow and how things are done, and systematizing the process so it's not everybody has their own bespoke way, but the system requires a certain flow of steps, and also writing that down. And that's been a bit of a challenge to get things out of people's heads, get it on paper, and create a unified system across the team so that we've had a lot of staff growth previously, and we're going through another growing transition now. And it's really becoming apparent that having those same steps each time makes it a lot easier to either transition staff or onboard new staff.
Yeah, and I would echo a lot of what Maura is saying. I think it's not only kind of building on that, taking the knowledge away from a few senior leaders and kind of empowering junior staff, but also as we look at our grant making from like the portfolio perspective, we're really able to kind of recognize what works, what doesn't, because we have the data all in one space. But as I was going to say, that's have been one of our, greatest strengths in moving forward. One of the challenges has been really, right-sizing expectations for folks across the organization. So, we release, we're going to have a new grants management tool. People go from like 0 to 60 and like, it's going to solve everything. And I want this and I want that. And it was really kind of like working with our Salesforce administrator, who's really good, like asking the right questions and really like stopping and pausing and saying like, okay, well, what is the purpose for X, Y, and Z, and moving slow so we do it correctly. I think implementation always has its challenges. So it's, always continuously trying to build on what we've gotten so far in our outbound funds, but also recognize that potential and continuously trying to push ourselves forward while communicating what's a reasonable expectation on, our phased in approach with it.
Sounds like the benefits that you've seen is exactly what you all hoped for, that you can see details across the organization and you're kind of reducing some of that admin burden, or you can see the hope of reducing some of that admin burden. And I'm going to be honest, the challenges that we just heard, especially from Nell, of trying to decide what to put in next. What, I'm thinking everyone in the room can relate to that, whether you're on outbound funds or a foundation or anything. Anytime you're managing a system, you're trying to figure out what's the best thing for my users, how will they use this better, what can we give them now, what needs to wait, and balancing all of that. And I think that is just so common. I just want to I want to pause and like have us all breathe that in to know that we're all experiencing that at the same time. And it's just a very common thing. I'm going to take a step deeper and talk a little bit more about integrations and customization. Obviously, the demo showed what Outbound Funds kind of looks like out of the box, and I referenced some things that you could include in it or add to it. And that's not how every organization is going to use it, a little bit differently. So that's the key. So we want to hear a little bit from Maura and Nell about if they needed external help to implement it. Were you able to manage in-house? What did you do to customize the module, and share a little bit about their integrations? So I'm going to keep going with Maura first.
Sure. So for external help, this was part of our rebuild. So we already had North Peak on board as part of the overall guidance and rebuild of our system, which definitely helped and gave a lot of perspective. And one of the things that was extremely helpful was we're, in addition to transitioning and onboarding the new version of Salesforce with Outbound Funds, our finance team is also looking to come up with a new finance system. So we kept trying to find the balance of what was kind of standard out of the box for Salesforce and Outbound Funds, so that at the time when we were launching this, we weren't entirely sure which new system we were going to bring on, to keep it as kind of standard as possible, so that when we do that integration, we won't have so many custom features that'll make it really difficult. But in terms of our own customizations, now that we're managing it in-house, one of the things that we're focusing on is keeping the flows and the structures pretty standard, but maybe changing out, the label or the naming conventions or the different options in the pick list, which really help by team to kind of just keep them as, comfortable within the system and understanding the evolution and growth. And then for other integrations, we have SignNow for our e-signature, Appsona for our template merging for both contracts as well as donor acknowledgements and grant awards, as well as form assembly, which we have for our applications and reports, which is also integrated with our communities that we have for projects and grantees.
And now?
Yes, so we are in more of maybe that beginning kind of taking steps towards this. We actually are just our next grant program. We're going to be using that connection with form assembly as our application portal. So every grant we've done up until this point has been either email attachments or we did use form assembly, but then I went and manually entered all of the funding requests into Salesforce. So with the help of our Salesforce admin, we're kind of bridging that gap, which is really exciting. And we use it pretty standard out of the box. We use the disbursements requirements, the structure you talked about. There were a few things that we focused on that are serving us well. So a lot of our grant money goes out to like lead groups in the state, but we fund coalition work. So a lot of our money then gets dispersed back out to smaller organizations or community-based organizations in the state. And so the first iteration of this, we're like, okay, we're capturing the data from our grantees, but we're losing so much information. Like, we're not going to know if someone's actually receiving our money because we're not capturing our sub-grantee information. So we were able to add a sub-grantee field as part of our funding request. So we were able to capture, all that the money going out the door. The other thing which we've tailored over time is adding, kind of a clarifier of what an organization of color is. So we've been really trying to racially diversify our grantee base. And, we've worked with lead partners in this on, defining what an organization of color is and tracking that. So we're not only knowing who to reach out to in this space, but also encouraging our programs to learn from one another in this space. So that's been really helpful. And just taking a step back, we did work with a consultant at the beginning when he kind of was like, here's a new tool. Give me your grants management manual and I'll put it in and see what happens. And we do have a Salesforce administrator full time who's been, she's on the chats, during Googling, figuring out, day by day what works and what doesn't. So it's kind of this ever progressing progress.
So a little secret into the Outbound Funds community. I believe I was helping your admin via the Outbound Funds group on the hub with their form assembly form just days ago.
Oh, yes.
So there's a little connection. There is a really active hub group, and so I was chatting back and forth with her about form assembly.
That's great.
But you guys both mentioned it, and as I said, I think in the hub, I'm a huge fan of form assembly just because it's a really simple yet powerful tool, and is super robust for some external facing applications. But there's also, of course, Salesforce communities, which Neo, or I should say Maura, referenced just a moment ago, but Neo has 2 communities that we've helped build out, and it's been kind of interesting to watch Outbound Funds work with that as well. So there's some great integrations out there. Now, you have mentioned that Outbound Funds is free, and we talked with orgs who know Salesforce, and we all know that free can be misleading. I often like to call it a free puppy because free puppies are amazing, but it actually takes some work. Yeah, it takes some work to have a puppy. So tell us a little bit about what it takes to get up to speed on the functionality, kind of that building internal expertise. And do you think an org can do it without a consultant or not? And more if you want to kick us off on that.
Yeah, I think it's possible, but I think it depends on the resources available. So I think it depends on, timelines as well as the staff capacity. And at Neo, we just did not have any of those. We just hired our first full-time Salesforce person at the beginning of this month. And so we've been on this journey for 2 years. So it's been an interesting time, and I was wearing a whole lot of hats to make this happen, and it would never have been possible without North Peak's help. And we even had multiple consultants from North Peak working on it at times. So I think it really just comes down to whether or not you have the staff ability to kind of focus on the needs of the staff, figuring out what those needs would translate into Salesforce, and then implementing them. If not, then I would recommend some external guidance and support.
Any opinions there now about?
Yeah, I think it's all about capacity, right? I think even we do have a wonderful full-time Salesforce administrator, but the capacity there, So I think we did work with a consultant. We've done, some changes in the beginning with a consultant. We've done some changes in-house. But I think the community that you talked about, that our Salesforce administrator has been able to learn so much from and really push it to the next level, has been, we wouldn't be in the place we are now, and we wouldn't even know what's possible without, I was jotting some things down today I even learned. So I think it's kind of this ever-evolving tool, which I think in this work, our work is ever evolving. So it's kind of exciting to be a part of.
And I'm gonna go off script for a moment and talk about the ever evolving nature of Outbound Funds. I think one of the most exciting parts for me about this tool is that it's still open source and it's still being worked on in the community and by the community. Even a few weeks from now, we're going to have an open source community sprint where I think there's 15 of us signed up specifically to get together and talk about outbound funds and build into outbound funds and make it a better tool. So it is ever evolving. But part of me, you can kind of tell by my voice, I get excited to the community aspect of it, that it's not just people out in Salesforce land making decisions for us. We are really involved in really continuing to build this thing that came from the community. So I'm going to ask one last question before we open it up for kind of the Q&A from the chat. What do you wish you would have known before you got started? And Maura, I'm going to start with you again.
I think I would have figured out the timeline and our needs a little bit better and deeper. I think Neo has a really great, external facing presence, and what we do is really important and, transforming in the community. But then you pull back, the curtain a little bit, and sometimes it was a little bit chaotic, and we were still working on, printing things in triplicate. So really getting down to what is it that each team does and how do they do it, and really understanding it, both from the team perspective as well as kind of the larger perspective, I think would have really helped, because I think Neo gets really used to not fitting in any one specific box because we're not quite a foundation. And, we are in a community organization because we have our projects and we have multiple people under one EIN. And so really trying to dig down and understand that takes a lot of time. And I'm not even sure internally we fully understood the breadth and scope when we were trying to translate it to North Peak as our external partner. So I would say just digging in and really understanding what the team's a little bit better.
Yeah, I think I would say is kind of knowing what's possible. Like I think, Shara, you talked about kind of it's ever evolving. But when we walked into it, it was kind of like, here's a new thing, try it. And I think knowing kind of what, on this day, what is possible for us to do would have been helpful. I think we have a better grasp on that now. And I think the other is kind of that internal expectation setting where, we now have this database, and it was kind of like, oh, okay, check that box, move on, where it was like, no, this is a journey. This is a roadmap. And then breaking out, this was our goals and this is how we got here, and recognizing these are the things that we could achieve or we want to look forward to, but really, building that out to recognize that it's not just check boxes and it's kind of moving along a journey would have been helpful. And I think it's kind of what we're focusing on this year.
It makes a lot of sense. There's always things, right? Everything in life you wish you would have known. What could I have known earlier? I appreciate you both sharing those. And I want to just thank you both for letting me pepper you with these questions and working through these questions with me. It is so exciting for me to hear how people are using outbound funds. I feel like it's been a 3-year journey and 2 years with Neo. So it's exciting to see where everyone is at. We do have some time for some audience Q&A. I believe a moderator is going to hop in and ask some questions. It seemed like a lot of them were about functionality, but Rich, if you want to grab some questions and ask them, we'll try to help. Might have gone away again. I did see one that I wanted to mention, so I'm going to answer that one first. It was, can you also track funders through the contact rules or through what we would call request rules? And the answer is you could, but those are people and not organizations. And so if I were your consultant, if I were telling you what to do, I would tell you to use the GAU expenditures and have your funders come in as opportunities and connect those opportunities to your funding requests through the GAUs or through lookup versus trying to attach them through the person, like a contact at that organization. Rich, were there other ones that you've seen? Otherwise, I can keep pulling from the list that I was jotting down. All right. Another question that I saw was trying to scroll so I can see them, was do accounting funds show summary information of allocations in and allocations out? Yes. The GAUs would be able to show you a summary of the allocations going in and the expenditures going out. So that's, you could do some totaling there on the GAU object or the general accounting unit object. And I see Teresa hopped in too. So if Teresa has some that she wants to throw in here too, we can definitely do that as well.
Can you hear me okay?
I can, yes.
Oh, cool. Okay. Someone asked a tough question. They're considering switching from Flux to Salesforce for their grants management solution. And they're wondering about some key differences, either in custom build or the grants management product and development. There's a lot in that question, Sharon. I can pull it apart.
I can answer a bit of that. To be honest, the key differences between like OFM and other Salesforce solutions is that OFM might give you a bit more flexibility and a bit more ability to customize what you need, whereas connecting in with like a Flux or something like that, you would be maybe sticking with their integration or what they've built out for Salesforce or what their system does already. So you might be able to customize a bit more with OFM. The question regarding grants management is actually built on top of OFM. And so the data model is very similar. And what you're getting with grants management and the product that's coming in just a few months and some of those additions is actually some additional kind of pre-built things that you can use. For example, the first thing that's coming out is due diligence management thing with action plans that would look a lot like maybe engagement plans or action plans if you've used the healthcare tool. But the idea that that piece is something that's not an OFM, but maybe is more complex. So grants management will layer that on top. I also know there's some application management coming. So it's the idea that you can get some pre-built solutions that are maybe some more complex things like budgeting that will be on top of outbound funds. So it kind of just depends on your needs. But again, anytime you add something to that's pre-built, you do lose some of that flexibility and some of that customization that you can do with outbound funds.
Thanks. Okay, I think both Maura, well, definitely Maura can answer this. Someone asked about whether organizations have used outbound funds to track funds dispersed to individuals, as opposed to just individuals receiving services, as opposed to disbursement of grants to other organizations.
Yes. So we had to come up with a system of doing that, which involved creating contact records on top of accounts for individuals that we pay, because there are times where we hire individuals as either consultants or send out honoraria, and the individuals are usually either associated with another organization or they are kind of in the system as themselves. And if they're in the system as themselves, then they have their own account with a contact record, which also layers in the privacy of tax ID numbers, which in the case of an individual is their social security number rather than an EIN, which is located on the account record level.
Thanks.
And I will say, I have some experience with some other grants management in Salesforce, and those are built on top of opportunities, which requires an account record. In outbound funds, you actually get the choice between tying the funding request directly to the applying contact and or the applying organization. So they don't actually have to have an organization to be connected to a funding request.
Great. Thanks. We had someone ask whether they can use campaigns with funding requests.
Can
might
you?
need more information.
Should you? Maybe not. Maybe consider funding programs. Our goal was to kind of align our data model with outbound funds or with the NPSP data model. So like campaigns or what you use for appeals would kind of parallel to funding programs, and opportunities like incoming money would parallel with funding requests. And so if you think about it like that, sometimes your funding programs can act as what you think of an appeal or a call for application. But that doesn't mean I have a colleague who wants to track the email sends. They're connecting that campaign to the funding request as which email campaign did this person respond to with this request. That they're using campaigns for that. So you'd have to look at your use case.
And I know we're technically at time. I'm going to volunteer Sherry to answer a couple more questions if people want to stay, and Nell and Maura. So I'm going to keep going.
Yeah.
For a couple more minutes. All right. We had a question about whether you can track funders through contact roles.
I answered that one already.
Oh, you did? Oh, thank you. Sorry.
Yep. No worries.
And a question about tasks. So the question is whether requirements are to be thought of as tasks for the recipient of the funds that they have to complete. And the follow-up question is, for tasks for Salesforce users, should we still use tasks?
Yes. So requirements you can think of are like deliverables on the NPSP side, where it's holding the thing that you want them to do. So it's kind of like a task or the thing that they need, the requirement they need to fulfill for you as the funder. You may still use tasks to actually track the action or the activity. For example, if you emailed them and said, hey, where's your report? That's a task, right? That's an activity, but the actual like sending in of the report and tracking of that report would be a requirement. Does that align with you guys, Maura and Nell, like how you view those?
Yeah, I was going to say with our funding programs, one of the ways that we use it is to track our fiscally sponsored projects, which have a lot of kind of moving pieces to them. So they come on, they need an account code, they need, finance to enter them into the system. So there's lots of, individual kind of items to check off the list to make a project active. And we've used tasks to kind of break out what those are. So it's update the account, which sends an email notification to finance, and then finance goes in and changes something. So we've kind of paired them together with, tasks being kind of the sub-intermediate action items.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think our tasks are more like internal activities. So our TA providers reviewing reports, but the requirements are the tangible items we need from our grantees.
Excellent.
We're getting a lot of questions about the grants management product. Sherry, I know you talked about that briefly earlier. And I'm just going to put a shout out that Deanna De Silva and others are looking to connect with people who've used grants management. So if there are folks who are...
Wow, it's a new product, so there's not many.
Yeah. There is a hub group.
Yep.
We can link to it in the chat. That's probably the best place to start for folks who have direct experience with the product. Yeah. Okay. And another pretty technical question about the functionality. Why should I use funding programs over using different record types for each funding request?
It's really about organizing your data, right? So different record types is possible. That's one way to be able to group your funding requests together. Something that's really nice about funding programs is you can actually make them kind of hierarchical in nature. So you could say like, this is our fellowship program. This is our fellowship program in 2020. Here's our fellowship program in 2021. And you can watch those roll up to each other. You could probably think of better examples, but it's the idea, like I can think of a specific example for NEO where they're starting to look at their funding program of this is their collaborative fund, but here are the initiatives under that collaborative fund for each year and how are they separating out those funds. You can't do that with just a record type. So it gives you a bit more complexity maybe. Does that, or do you have something to add?
Yeah, I was going to say, I just had that conversation yesterday with one of the collaborative funds, and they had a light bulb moment saying, oh, it's like Russian nesting dolls for our grants. that's basically how we've got the overall collaborative fund, and then they've got kind of 3 big initiatives, and then under that one of them does it quarterly, but then within the quarters, then there's projects and there's general, so that's how they're going to break it down. But the fact that you can have the parent like overarching top level funding program with all the child objects below it really makes it, we're trying, and they're probably our most disordered, slightly chaotic and siloed funding, collaborative fund, and the fact that we can try to kind of, narrow them down into something that makes some sort of sense is really helpful.
And just to echo that, I think the way we're trying to like build out our system is like, okay, if I leave my job tomorrow, are they going to understand what I've done? Because, that's kind of this where knowledge management isn't one person that does this work. It's really how are we creating a system where the person that doesn't know what a funding program looked like or a funding project or whatever 3 years ago, they can look at it and understand from that outside perspective.
I am sharing our screen just in case we're wrapping up here so people can see who we are and ways to contact us if they want to. But Teresa, are there more questions that we want to answer?
Can I just ask one closeout question? So I think something that we've been talking about is like the value of outbound funds is the fact that you can change it as your processes change, as you add new teams or you consolidate teams or you add a new program, whatever the case may be. Nell and Maura, what are you comfortable sharing with us about what you're going to do with your system next?
I think our biggest our current push right now is to get our grant making teams really using and implementing outbound funds through funding programs and requirements and connecting that to our communities. So we just launched our grantee community in November, and it'll be fully launched probably by May to get all of our grant making programs in there, as well as launching our project community for our fiscally sponsored and donor services projects. And that's coming in May and June.
I think for us, it's just kind of recognizing the potential. So I think it's, diving into the analytics side and really be able to paint that picture to our internal staff and our funders on what our grant making is doing. That's something we're going to look at in 2021. And also the creating more of a program application platform, which we haven't done.
So there are still questions about the actual functionality, and to be like respectful of everyone's time, I want to point everyone to the hub. Sherry, I know you are. That's basically telling Sherry that she will need to, and her other outbound funds team members, that they will need to be on the lookout for questions about how to make the best use of the product. But the team is really, really responsive. I can attest to that. And also there are some resources. Someone already mentioned there's a how-to series on YouTube. We can share in the hub a link to Sherry's demo that has sound. You won't need her in your ear talking to you over the phone, talking you through it. And any other resources, Nell, Maura, Sherry, that you would recommend that were helpful to you?
Thank you.
The hub is a good place.
Yeah, I was going to say, a lot of my, yeah.
Okay. Awesome.
Excellent. All right. I think that's it. I think there's one more slide that I'm supposed to show. Let's see what it looks like. Thank you for coming. You can return back to the reception area to see your next networking, collaboration, or learning options. And again, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye.